All right, everyone, welcome into another edition of Cover One Buffalo. Nate Geary filling in for the famous AQ. He finally gets a nice little break, a nice little vacation with the family. So Aaron Quinn out today. Nate Geary filling in for my duties today will be our Cover One founder, the Godfather, Erik Turner. What's up, man? How are you?
What's going on, Nate? Yeah, it's been a couple of weeks, man. I'm glad to be back on with you, though.
So back on the podcast, and we've got offensive line, and I think this is a very relevant topic. Obviously, a lot of news coming out today about Richie Incognito. Obviously, not good news. This is, 2 days after the Bills made it official, releasing Richie Incognito from the reserved retired list. He was free to sign with another team, but I have a sneaky suspicion, Erik, that maybe the Bills knew about this incident before the rest of the public did.
You know, I was thinking the same thing. I mean, I don't know when exactly it went down. They're saying it happened early Wednesday morning, but I feel like the Bills had an idea about his behavior and how it was kind of, sliding. And I hate to, talk about some guy's behavior who, I used to talk to Richie quite frequently, but I haven't talked to him in a little bit. So I hate to, kind of rumorize on him, but it sucks to see this for a player like that. A guy that, obviously fit right in Buffalo, and he played his heart out, and, he was still playing at a high level. And I know when we did release him the other day, Nate, you kind of hit me up with a message like, is he going to sign somewhere else? And I'm like, it's a good possibility. But now that you see this news, I think that all but sums it up that his career may be over now.
I think his career's over. Yeah. And it's definitely shocking because here's the thing, he was on his best behavior, like, to the point where you really thought he completely changed from the guy that a lot of people thought he was. Listen, this wasn't, a lot of his issues didn't just stem from his time in Miami with the bullying scandal. I mean, this is a pattern of sort of aggressive and unpredictable behavior going back to his college career, where he was really sort of kicked out of Nebraska for being sort of a hothead. And this sort of thing has followed him around, but it didn't here in Buffalo. And he really became and listen, Erik, like I'm the same way as you. I liked Richie. I thought he always did a nice job of not only, filling us in. I thought, he asked you to do a film breakdown for him. So like, this was a guy that was very personable, very likable. And I think truly his teammates liked him. I think everybody inside that locker room, even after the whole, Trump thing where he was sort of very outspoken about Donald Trump and whether or not that was going to mesh well with his African-American teammates. From everything that I know, his teammates loved him. So this sort of whole thing has become really a shock to me that I thought he really turned a corner in his life. And obviously, if Richie's watching or hearing or even hears about this, we're all wishing for the best because I know that his time here in Buffalo, I feel like maybe reflects him more as a person than some of the things that are going on now.
Yeah, like I said, I have a lot of good feelings towards Richie because he treated me well. He was down to earth with me. Any type of questions I had in regards to scheme or technique when it came to the offensive line or offense as a whole, he answered them. So, I really have no bad things to say about him. And I agree with you. I think his teammates kind of feel the same way. I'm sure they're blindsided by this because, this is something that the last couple of years he really hasn't done. So, I think he was well liked in the locker room and in the city of Buffalo. So it was kind of sad for me to see on my timeline some of the stuff that people were saying to him, especially if it's more of a mental issue. But of course, our thoughts are with him, and hopefully he is watching and he enjoys our little breakdown here.
So let's get into the guys that are going to be affecting the roster in 2018. Before I do that, though, I do want to remind folks who are watching and hanging along with us this evening that the Cover One app is a must download. So go to the Apple Store. You can go on iTunes Apple Store, of course, or you can go to the Droid Marketplace and you can buy them there. Or you don't have to buy them. It's free. That's the best part about it. And not only that, but if you're, especially like we had Brett here in the chat room who is probably at work or having to deal with some work, and you want to have that notification when the not only the podcasts come live, but when work drops, which it drops not only after 5 o'clock when everyone gets out of work, but it's dropping all day long. So it's great to have and be up to date with all the Cover One stuff went through the app. But Erik, tell a little people before we get going into the offensive line what they'll get with the premium membership. Because if you haven't checked it out and you'll like following our breakdowns, specifically Erik's film breakdown, and not only that, but the team we've been able to assemble with Rob Quinn joining the crew now, there's a lot of must-see content. What can people see and expect if they're looking to maybe get a premium membership?
We got a few things, kind of in the pike right now. We're going to be doing some sort of film session. We're kind of working out the kinks on that, where we're going to have our premium subscribers, pick a game, pick a player, and we're just going to watch film together. We're just going to shoot the breeze, watch some film. We'll drop some knowledge here and there, and what we can, and obviously take questions throughout the film session. So, because it's one of those things when you're watching these games live at the broadcast angle, you miss a lot, and you're watching the ball when you're missing a lot of other things that can help you give you context to just the play in the game itself. So we are putting that together soon, especially once, things kind of die down after OTAs and whatnot, and it's the Lola off season. So we're going to be doing some film room sessions. Again, you're going to be have certain access to work that not everyone's going to be able to see. And once we get into the season, that there's going to be more and more content that is going to be locked up per se. Because it takes a lot of time to do these, deep dives. And if you read Rob's breakdown recently on Allen and on the defense, you see this is not something that takes 2 hours to do, guys. We had a lot of film and a lot of statistics. We cover it from every angle and add as much context as we can. So for that, obviously, I want to give these contributors, what they're due. So that's why we charge that, $10 right now. You can get a year membership. So definitely check it out at the website and become a premium member. And some of these questions we're going to take at the end of the podcast are from our guys. So definitely check it out.
So let's hop in now. Let's dive. Let's do our deep dive into the offensive line and let's give a shout out to Buffalo Rumblings, who got this great pick off of Deion Dawkins' Instagram page of basically who we might be looking at. At least we have locked down right now the first team left side of the offensive line. Deion Dawkins at that left tackle position, which I don't think anybody was really wondering about. But then, and here's the picture that I just referenced. As you can see in the background, Ryan Groy right to the left of Deion Dawkins' head, and then to the right is Connor McDermott. So those two guys right now don't appear to be with that first-team offensive line. The guy standing next to Deion Dawkins in this picture looks to be Vlad Ducasse, which would be, I think, maybe some news to me that they moved him over to the left side. Now, we didn't really get a good opportunity to look at what the right side looks like. I'd have to think, and we'll get into this when we get to the exterior or the outside of the offensive line, that right tackle position is still being locked down by Jordan Mills. It appears that this coaching staff, at least to start OTAs, has some loyalty to the veteran players. I think that's why you're seeing Nathan Peterman here as the starting quarterback with the first team unit as OTAs start, with the idea that each guy's going to get an opportunity from this point on to earn their position. But let's start inside, and let's start at the left guard position, because I think it's an interesting one. And you mentioned right before we got on air that maybe it's the best case scenario, or it's a good thing we're seeing Vlad Ducasse lining up at that left guard position.
I do. I mean, obviously they went out and drafted Wyatt Teller from Virginia Tech. So he's a guy that played a ton of time on the left side at guard. In the Senior Bowl, they had him over at the right guard position. So he does have versatility. But the fact that they're putting Ducasse at left guard, and we're hypothetically thinking that John Miller's at right guard, I think that's a good sign that, competition's going on right now. They're not going to give any positions to any of these young guys. And I think that if Teller has a decent camp in the next few months, I think he could steal that spot, that left guard spot, because I just don't understand why you take a guy who started a bunch of games at right guard last year over Miller and then move that guy to left guard. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I think that does set up, which I'm a big fan of Teller. I do think that sets up for Teller to eventually, if he, puts in the hard work, which I think he will, I think he could overtake that left guard spot.
So let's talk about the right side now, because you mentioned John Miller as probably the fit here. I mean, if we're thinking Vlad Ducasse moves to the left side, we're likely seeing Ducasse as your number two, your first guard in on either side of the ball, which it's nice that you're starting Ducasse early in this process off on the left side, because you already know he has that familiarity on the right side. Can he translate some decent play to the left while Miller takes over on the right side? And I think we don't have a certain that Miller was lining up as the starting right guard in the first team offense, but I think by process of elimination, we can sort of take an estimate that Miller was lining up there. And what you're seeing here is some film from last year. where he actually did get some playing time. But it was sort of a weird situation with him last year, wasn't it, Erik? I mean, he starts the season, then Juan Castillo brings Vlad Dukasin, but both, in my opinion, were pretty ineffective in the scheme they were playing in last year.
Yeah, I mean, when it came to outside zone, that was not Miller's forte, and we know that he's a power guy. He always has been. So when they threw him in this outside zone scheme, it just didn't fit him well, primarily when the run was going away, so when they were going to the left. And you'll see this clip here from a couple years ago where we have Groy at center and Miller at right guard. And the reason why Miller fits, I think, what Daboll wants to do is because of this torque, because of this power, where we want to start pushing guys vertically. We don't want to use that horizontal stretch anymore. I mean, Daboll will have it. He's got it in the arsenal. Don't get me wrong, but this is the type of stuff we want to do. We want to run these inside zone runs where we're reestablishing the line of scrimmage vertically, not horizontally. So I think that will fit Miller better if he is given the chance.
And I think, too, if you add in Teller and the idea of having Teller on the left side and Miller on the right side, you're talking about two bulldogs in the middle of your offensive line. And you're talking about a lot of those power, those inside zone plays. Those two can really, I think, especially with the athleticism that I think is sneaky on Teller, and I think athleticism for Miller that doesn't really ever get talked about, but he does have the ability. I thought it was very effective, especially his rookie year as a pulling guard. And you'll see some examples here of the same thing. But with Teller, and I think you're looking at two guys that could really be, and here's the thing about Miller too, Erik, that doesn't get talked about enough. He's still a really young player. So in the interior offensive line, at the two guard positions, if Miller can have a bounce back year, he was the most improved offensive lineman or the most improved guard on this team going back 2 years ago, going into last season. And then obviously the big drop off with the new system. But you mentioned the system being tailored to him a little bit more this year. And that has me excited about maybe another bounce back year for Miller. But let's talk about, before we talk about Ryan Groy, because I think maybe he's the most interesting guy in all this, Let's talk about Russell Bodine in the middle, who it appears to be, anyways, from the picture, is getting the first crack at center, which, again, I am a little surprised with. But talk about his pin and pull ability in the run game here from an example from last season.
I mean, Bodine, he scares me, Nate. I'm kind of with you. He does scare me. Does he have the ability to get in space like this on these pin and pulls? Yeah, he does. But what worries me about him is his balance, his power and strength at the point of attack. Now, we talked about wanting to, reestablish that line of scrimmage and moving guys vertically. He doesn't have that leg drive. He doesn't have the power to do that at the point of attack. So that does worry me a little bit. Now, on these pin and pull runs, can he throw a down block and have a guard pull? Yeah, I think he can do that. Can he work combination blocks like you see here? Absolutely. But when you're asking him to go one-on-one with Danny Shelton, like you see here, who's going to see a lot of now that guy's with the Patriots. I just worry about his strength at the point of attack. And I mentioned balance. It's one thing I saw a lot of on film where, when you see an offensive lineman end up on the ground, that's not usually a good sign. The offensive lineman, one of their biggest or most important traits is balance and their ability to leverage. And when you see a guy that's always on his toes and always falling over when he's supposed to be blocking, it's usually not a good sign. So when you're watching film and you see a lineman on the ground a lot, start counting those and tallying those, because that's not a good sign for an offensive lineman.
Certainly not. And I haven't watched a ton of film on Bodine, but everything that I have seen, it doesn't appear to me that he's necessarily aggressive. Like, he doesn't really strike me as a guy with like a mean streak in him, a guy like Richie Incognito or the people that you can sort of point out that have that mean streak. He doesn't really have that. And not that I think Eric Wood ever did, but Eric Wood was very solid. He was consistent. Although he was not always in the best place, you never really saw too much of Eric Wood on the ground, like you mentioned with Bodine. But yeah. I think this brings us to the next and maybe the more puzzling question here is, where does Ryan Groy fit into all this nonsense up front? And I think it's a great question because a lot of people are sort of confused, me being one. Is you see him come in last season in place of Eric Wood with injury, and you just see a player that the offense didn't miss a beat. And this isn't the last season, isn't the only season that he came in and really had success. This is 2 years ago here you're seeing with Mike Gillislee in the backfield. Yep. And I think he's shown that he can have success not only at center, but at guard. And I think starting caliber success, which maybe makes me question what it is that's holding him back in terms of gaining the confidence of this coaching staff, especially Juan Castillo. Is it something that he's not doing? Is it something that they're maybe worried about or needing him for more depth positions? But considering now that you have Wyatt Teller, I wonder, because I think they have plenty of depth inside to not have to worry about getting Groy injured or something. I just think that's a bogus excuse too. I think at the end of the day, he's the better player out of him and Russell Bodine, and I think that wins out. But as we're seeing with a couple other positions like quarterback, you'd think that maybe Groy would have got their green light to start at the center position, at least early on, with the idea that Bodine's going to come in and fight for that spot.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think his best position, because of his athleticism and his experience, is at center. We talked about, wanting to, run the ball down these guys' throats. I mean, he did that when he filled in for Eric Wood. I think he needs to play inside. I don't think he has athleticism to play. I worry even at guard because it's not something we've really seen with him. I worry about him playing guard and getting out in space because he doesn't have those type of feet. But he does have good length. He's played all of the positions. He's got really good power and torque as well. And obviously can hit those down blocks and hold the backside nose tackle when they want to do that pin and pull run. But I do think he's a center, especially because of his pass pro. I think he can handle those guys better than he can't handle a speed rusher as a tackle. He can't handle a upfield penetrator as a 3 technique. I just don't think he's that guy. I think he's good center. I think he can anchor really well. And he obviously he'll know a lot of these plays and the concepts that Dable is going to install.
And I think to your point about his pass blocking ability, I think that maybe that's where you look at Bodine and him. I think Bodine is a better pass blocker than he is a run blocker. I just don't think he has that lower body strength. So if we want to, maybe we don't agree on this, and maybe I don't even really agree myself, that if I had to think that they were even in one place, it would be in pass protection, even though I do think that even Groy has the step up there, the leg up. But it's in the run game where I just see such an obvious advantage that's tilting towards Groy. He's got that. I mean, just look at Bodine and look at Groy. The lower body sticks out to you because Groy is so big. He's thick on the lower body. Not only that, but you just see their helmet level when especially in a run type play or even in this pass play. Yeah. You don't see the defender popping up Ryan Groy's head because, simply put, he's a big man. He's difficult to move around. Where when Bodine, especially in run plays, where that center, that offensive lineman, that first step needs to be downfield. Otherwise, you're going to get blown up and get that play blown up. A lot of times with Bodine, you see that. You see his head pop up. You see him lose leverage very early on in the play. And that concerns me. With Groy, it just seems like it. But this coaching staff has made sort of questionable or puzzling decisions in terms of player personnel to us or the fans. So maybe they're seeing something that we're not. But I don't know. I'm going to struggle that through the end of training camp. If Ryan Groy is not your starting center, I'm going to have to. I have to ask why.
Yeah, and I think that Tyrod Taylor had a lot to do with that last year because he's a guy that obviously wanted to escape the pocket quite frequently. So they wanted guys with length, guys that could redirect with their length, guys that could mirror a little better, so guys with better feet. And I think that's partly why Dukas got the job over Miller because of that footwork and that length. But I think this year it's a little different. You got completely different quarterbacks. If Allen does get in, he's going to want to, he has more mobility than the other 2 quarterbacks we have. But I think that when you throw a Groy in there, he does anchor better than Eric Wood, which has been Eric Wood's problem the last couple of years, anchoring in that pocket, getting pushed into the quarterback's face. So I think Groy is a better center. And honestly, if he doesn't start at center, I don't know what they're even thinking because from what I saw in Russell Bodine, I'm not impressed. And to me, he looks like a backup. Physically, visually, technique-wise, he doesn't impress me at all. Hey, maybe he plays better for us, but I just didn't see it last year.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And of course, what people have to keep in mind, or we have to keep in mind, is we just don't see them every day in practice. So we don't exactly know. And not only that, but how he fits in with the rest of the offensive line. Maybe it's a chemistry issue. I don't know. There are other factors here at play that maybe we're not privy to. But at some point, talent does have to trump everything else. If he's better, he needs to be out there. And I think that brings us sort of to the next position group on the offensive line, and that's the tackle group. One that I think we talked about before we got on, too, that's very, very thin depth-wise. Right now, there are 2 offensive tackles, in my opinion, on this team. With the addition of Marshall Newhouse, I don't know that you're getting – I don't know what you're getting in Marshall Newhouse. I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't know what you're getting. This is a player who has starting experience in this league, but is one of those guys like Vlad Dukas that you brought in, and you look at Pro Football Focus and you're like, well, why did the Bills just bring in the 65th out of 70 ranked players at his position? Like, that's sort of weird, right? And That's kind of where you are with Marshall Newhouse. Can he be a serviceable backup if one of these two guys go down? I'm concerned. But let's start with what we know. And what we know is that left side is locked down by what we're hoping to be a franchise left tackle on Deion Dawkins. And listen, a great rookie campaign for him. He really made Cordy Glenn expendable. He made Cordy Glenn a tradable commodity by stepping into his place and, in my opinion, playing better and more consistently at times than Cordy Glenn did in the previous 2 years. And more importantly, proved to be that he can play every down and be a healthy player, which is what you just did not see from Cordy Glenn the last few years.
Yeah, and that's the key. I mean, he's healthy and he can do things like this. He can get out in space, and I think that's something that Dable is going to love about him. He's going to be pulling him on these crack tosses. He's going to be able to install a lot more fold blocks inside when they do want to run those inside zone plays. He's basically a guard at tackle, so that's definitely a plus. And when you talk about a guy, and he's powerful too, so yes. I mean, he can really do it all. At college, at Temple, they ran a lot of zone, so he knows the zone schemes. Obviously played in a bunch of it last year. And he also played in some of the power schemes. And so I was pretty impressed with him, honestly. I mean, I thought that he could be a left tackle. I didn't think he'd be a left tackle that soon. But right. You see this play here. This is just, I mean, that's a savvy play right there. It's a snatch trap. I mean, that's not something a rookie left tackle coming from Temple does. I mean, that's a real heady move by the rookie there.
And that's what I was going to mention is if you look at his hand placement here on this play, that is a veteran type counter move to a pretty good speed rush here. Like this is, obviously he's going for the outside. This isn't a one-on-one necessarily bull rush. It's not great by any means, but you look at that's an NFL player and you have a guy who is early in his career. This is midseason. This is right after essentially he's taken over as the full-time left tackle. And he looks like he's been playing the position for 3, 4, 5 years. But he brings that explosiveness, that athleticism that this offensive line desperately needed last year. They needed that athleticism infused into the lineup, and that's what you saw from Dawkins. He had a really, really impressive rookie campaign. I expect him to take a step forward this year. But not only that, I think he has really sort of all the tools to be this team's best offensive lineman next year and maybe sort of walk into a leadership role. That wouldn't shock me. I really, really love, and I go back to that draft last year. Obviously, Zay Jones, a guy that I'm writing about right now, about that 2017 draft. But you're looking at that 2017 draft, and that draft class has to have the type of year that they had last year, except maybe that step forward. Yeah. If this team's going to take the next step or be as good as they were next year. And to me, it starts with Dawkins.
Right, and Tyler kind of alluded to this in the chat box. He had mentioned about we would have been better off if we had played Milano sooner. I mean, I could tend to agree with that because of his versatility and athleticism, and I think that having those rookies get a lot of playing time. Bean and McDermott always mention it. That's valuable experience that they gained in their first year. So I do think, and we talked about Ducasse and playing at left guard. I do think that a guy like Teller, as Tyler mentions, is a guy that, maybe doesn't start right away, but a few games in and they start to struggle, throw that guy in and see what he can do. That's why you draft him. So if we can get a couple of this, guys from this draft class, like you said, to get some playing time early, it's really laying that foundation that we need for future years.
There's no doubt about it. And obviously, let's talk about that right side. Jordan Mills, at least for what I would think, is probably a lock on that right side. It wasn't terrible last season. I think a lot of times, Jordan Mills gets maybe more criticism than at times he deserves. At times it's definitely warranted because it just seems like he whiffs. Here you could see him just get simply overpowered and outmatched. I mean, that is just, but he's also faced going up against Cam Jordan, who is a very, very, very good defensive line.
I don't even know if that's Cam Jordan, honestly. I think that's I think that's Hendrickson. Yeah, that's Hendrickson.
You're right. That's not
rookie. So there's a rookie on him. And the thing,
never mind. I was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. But.
I know. I had to though, because and part of this is technique and what Castillo is teaching. With this tight shade here by this D end, Mills he plays with wide hands here. He tries to do the hug technique where he just kind of grabs onto him and mirrors him. But that it leaves you open to plays like this where your chest is open, you get lifted by a rookie. So I think, yes, I'm with you. I think Mills, he takes a lot of heat for that position. He has the last few years, but it's crazy how, when you think about it, the different coaches that have come in here and he's still playing. So I got to give him some credit. He's still, he's doing something right where, several coaches are like, all right, he can still play. He's still starting this league.
Right. And here's this case where he's actually going up against Jordan. So then maybe this is a better opportunity to really sort of get a measuring stick. But, and I think, too, when you look at the right side, it's become a more important position in the NFL, in today's NFL, because of where pass rushers go. I mean, historically, you align your best pass rusher up against your right tackle because he's the least athletic of the two tackles, and maybe you're weaker of the two positions. You want your best guy on the blind side of your quarterback, but it's almost turned into a weak spot across the league, the right tackle position. There aren't a lot of great right tackles. So when you're looking at a guy who's serviceable in Mills, I think you see a guy who struggles with consistency, but I think maybe more so than anything, struggles with technique. And you see there, he's really compensating for a fast pass rusher coming on the outside. But that's where he struggles the most. Is I do believe, though, at times he gets bull rushed and it does not look pretty. I think he struggles more against the speed that comes on the outside because, simply put, his drop steps aren't quick. He's not fleet of foot. He's a fat foot. And you can see it on plays where he's going up against athletic guys coming from the outside.
Yeah, and you're right. His vertical kick slide is not the prettiest thing. It's almost like he's just backpedaling, which is not how you're supposed to do it. It's supposed to be very clean. It's supposed to be a really good shifting of your weight and almost let the defender declare what he's doing. So again, it'll be interesting to see this year with Dable coming in. I know Castillo's still there. Are they going to change some of these techniques? Because the vertical sets by our offensive linemen last year were quite ugly, and they're not those type of offensive linemen. They still aren't. And so it'll be interesting to see what they do from a technique standpoint, because obviously Mills struggled a lot when they asked him to use this hug technique and in his kick slide. So we'll see.
So let's talk about this group as a whole and specifically the personnel fit in terms of what we can expect from this system, that Brian Dable is going to be implementing this year. Do you see, and I think it's an obvious answer, and I think it's yes, that the position and the personnel that they have is likely going to fit better than having that zone scheme that, first of all, didn't fit what they had last year, but I think even more so this year would be even more of a nightmare to try to run, other than Dawkins, who I think we both agree is a very good zone blocker.
Yeah, I mean, what was interesting, because I've obviously been studying every game last year from Alabama and the schemes that they ran, and they ran a lot of zone running. Over 50% of their runs last year were zone runs, split pretty evenly between outside zone and inside zone. But they got 10 touchdowns out of outside zone, and I want to say up over 1,000 yards. So they were very productive on that outside zone run. But it's mainly a complement to the inside zone. We talked about moving, the defensive line vertically. I think it's more of a complement, and it will be this year because, again, I think they're going to be more of a power-based scheme. And inside zone, it can still be, power-based. So I think schematically these guys do fit better if Dable were to install, much more of the inside zone and those power and gap schemes. So I think, the guys are going to be happy about that. Because they're not going to be running sideline to sideline trying to chase creases for the running back.
All right, let's grab to a couple of these questions that are in the chat box. I know our man Dean on Twitter got to us too. I think we probably hit on that with a lot of the talk that we had about Groy, which I think is really sort of been the common theme amongst people when we're talking about this offensive line is what the hell's going on with Groy? Is he playing center? Is he playing guard? And I think we're still in the exploratory stage of that and sort of where he's going to fit on this offensive line. I think Erik and I, though, are both in agreement that he does possess the talent over guys like Russell Bodine, and even you can make the argument over Vlad Dukas at guard. Where he fits in, I don't know, and I think that will likely play out when training camp gets a little bit underway, obviously. But I don't know. I think we both are in agreement that in terms of just raw talent and what he could bring to the team, that he's a better fit for what they're trying to do than a guy like Bodie.
Yeah, and hands down. I would like to see him at center. I'm kind of iffy. I don't think they probably won't put him there, but we'll see. I mean, I'd like to see him play over Bodine, but I don't know. I'm not going to hold my breath.
A couple of good ones here, and I hope I don't butcher your name, man. Khalid, I hope that's how you say it. I guess, yeah, exploratory stage really sounds promising. It's a good point too. But and Khalid brought up here that he thinks Tyrod's running ability covered up a lot of the issues up front last year, wondering how Mills will do with a guy more of a pocket passer. And I think I'm totally on the same page as he is in worrying what happens when you got a guy like A.J. McCarron or Nathan Peterman who don't necessarily boast crazy athleticism, not the athleticism that Tyrod Taylor had, but they can move to a certain extent. I think maybe Peterman more than McCarron. If McCarron's back there, you're looking at a pure pocket passer, a guy that's sort of a statue back there that's not going to do a ton of moving.
No, you're right. He's a guy that's going to have to rely on his mental processing pre to post snap. He's going to have to get the ball out. I mean, he comes from a system over in Cincinnati where Andy Dalton was always one of the top guys from snap to throw. So he's going to have to play like that. So his ability to diagnose coverages from pre to post snap is going to be key, because he's not going to be a guy that can extend the play outside or inside the pocket. He's going to have to get rid of it, whether it's just throwing it away or just getting it to his receivers. And Dable, obviously, if McCarron's a starter, Dable is going to have to, change the game plan and strategy if a guy like McCarron's in the starting lineup.
And I think, Bills fan 7883 brings up another good point too, in talking about there are plays you can easily go back to and say, well, I mean, Tyrod Taylor put his offensive line in a really poor position, just, vice versa, how that offensive line, or how Tyrod Taylor made them look good in a lot of instances. And I think it definitely works in both ways. And the other thing too with Tyrod that I think maybe doesn't get talked about enough is the opportunities that Tyrod had to step up in the pocket or manipulate the pocket a little bit more effectively, and wasn't able to do it because he's just not that type of player. He's not the kind of guy where he's going to feel very comfortable stepping up and throwing over the size of the offensive lineman there in front of him. I think you look at a guy like Josh Allen. What I would really consider the best part of his game is he's sort of a wizard when it comes to breaking tackles inside the pocket, but has absolutely shown the willingness to step up into the barrel and deliver a ball before he's about to get smoked. And it's not that Tyrod didn't do that, but at times he just didn't know where to be in the proper positions inside of the pocket where there are natural areas of progression. And Tyrod just maybe lacked that nuance, or that maybe, to be honest, at times I thought it was willingness to be in the inside of the pocket, because I felt like he maybe lost a little confidence when he wasn't able to see sort of the whole view. And that's why I thought he played much better at a shotgun too.
Oh, totally.
You know what I mean?
Because I love that point, because, and we had touched upon just a few minutes ago about the techniques that they're going to use. I mentioned vertical sets. Vertical sets are to keep the pocket deep, because for a guy like Tyrod Taylor, who isn't really, tall and can't see over the line of scrimmage, to help his field vision, you want to keep that pocket, that interior pocket, you want to keep the depth of it. All right. So you keep the centers, the guards in, and you maintain the depth of pocket so that he can see the field and keep that pressure out of his face. Well, when you have a guy like Josh Allen, who's 6'5", do you need to do that?
Nope.
Do you sacrifice those edges and putting your tackles in those stressful situations one-on-one outside when you have a guy that can obviously make throws from the pocket because of his height, and he doesn't always have to have his feet set? So that'll be interesting. And what they put into the scheme, because Castillo's always been a vertical set guy, but if this is Dable's offense, what is he going to use? And what he's going to use on a week-to-week basis may change based on that quarterback, like you mentioned.
And this is a little off base, but I think it was you that was posting a couple of broadcast videos of announcers basically talking about the teaching that you saw from Brian Dable and those guys going to practice in the preparation the week before. And the first thing you hear about with Brian Dable is he's already out there during rookie OTAs, rookie minicamp, coaching up Josh Allen. And I think that's the underrated part of what Brian Dable is going to bring to not only a young quarterback in Josh Allen, but to an offensive line, to the communication from one sideline to the next when you're talking about wide receivers. And I brought this up too, about the wide receivers in my article that'll be coming out on Cover One tomorrow morning, is in this system, wide receivers, especially young wide receivers, are going to have a little bit more of an advantage, because if you think about it, Zay Jones last year, his head's spinning already as it is. Now imagine having to get all of your assignments from the opposite sideline without being able to look to the sideline for a big cue card. You know what I mean? So This system is going to have so many more benefits than just, a better offensive system for our offensive linemen. But in terms of everything else, it's just more simple. And I think I just wonder what that does for an offensive group, especially an offensive line, that maybe doesn't have the continuity it's had over the past few years. Is a system that they're all going to be coming up through in OTAs and training camp here, and a system that they'll all have the same amount of knowledge on.
Yeah, and this system, when we're talking offensive line, and much like an offense altogether, I mean, we need to stick to it. That's been the problem. And I don't want to get too far off base, but I think continuity is a big thing on the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, our head coach is a defensive guy, so he's not putting in too much information, too much coaching on a day-to-day basis when it comes to the offense. So having a guy like Dable that's obviously been in the league for many years, went to college, learned some of those concepts down there, learned about different ways of managing these young kids and how you can translate it to an NFL game. We always talk about this, Nate, developing offensive linemen. It is much harder to do nowadays. And that's why you see guys in free agency, offensive linemen who are really good are getting paid. And you see these guys getting drafted high, and they're counting on these guys to come in and play right away. It's harder to develop offensive linemen nowadays because of the CBA and many, many reasons. But having a guy like Dable, let's keep him there and let him teach. In literally every game that I watched from Alabama, they mentioned Brian Dable and his teaching, his strategic game planning, and you saw it. And you'll see, some of these cut-ups that I do, and when I'm breaking down his offense, you'll see that he ran certain schemes, for example, outside zone versus certain teams, certain weeks. All of that is planned in the offseason. You're expecting to see this type of defensive front at week 4 and 6. Well, how do you beat that defensive front? You run inside zone, or you run, pin and pull run. So a lot of that base game planning is done in the offseason, done right now. That's stuff to keep in mind, because that's one thing that everyone that has come in contact with Dable has said, that he's a teacher and a guy that knows how to game plan. And so that's something that we look forward to as Bills fans. And I'm sure the offensive line, getting some of that continuity and some of these new techniques down so that we can, get back to what we do well, and that's dominating up front.
And the last thing, Erik, is because since we're bringing up that developmental process of the offensive line and how much more difficult it is, the one guy that's got brought up here a couple of times, Connor McDermott, the offensive lineman, UCLA, I believe was an undrafted free agent last year.
Six round pick by the Patriots. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. And then he was signed because they cut him.
They cut him, yeah.
They cut him. So he's a 6th-round pick. I don't really have too much information on McDermott. I know they've kept him around. He was on the active roster last year towards the end of the year when they needed depth. He's never really had an opportunity to get in and play. He's going to have an opportunity with the twos in training camp and preseason to show that maybe – listen, we talked about Newhouse. I'm not saying – I just don't know enough about McDermott that McDermott can't come in and beat out Newhouse for his same position.
Right, and I did study McDermott when they picked him up last year. They stashed him away for a while. I thought that he's a Castillo type guy, kind of long, and very good at his vertical sets, which at UCLA he had to play that way because of Rosen, and Rosen's I know it's been coined that he's not athletic, but he's a pocket passer. So they ran a lot of vertical sets. So he's more of a Castillo type guy. Where he falls this year, throw him in there. Competition.
Yeah.
I believe he played left tackle in college. I'm not sure where they were lining him up last year, when it came to scout team or even just, down on the practice squad. But you never know with a guy like that. For me, the main thing with McDermott was he was a little light in the rear end. He needed to gain some muscle mass and some strength. And if he did that this offseason and he has a chance if he can play right tackle, why not? Why wouldn't you try to throw him in there?
So depth. That's going to be questioned this year. I have the feeling this offensive line may still be a work in progress heading into even the final weeks of training camp, because I think there's an opportunity for this Bills team, Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott, to add 1 or even 2 more pieces, especially on the outside, as teams cut their rosters down at the end of training camp, when maybe a guy who gets worked out as a starter for another team that gets beaten out by a younger player with a lower salary, maybe that opens up the opportunity for the Bills to get a starting caliber or replacement caliber offensive lineman to sort of shuffle into the mix here. But I think we are both in agreement that this is definitely a work in progress year for this Bills offensive line, but one that I'm looking forward to, because I'm really looking forward to that second-year development of Deion Dawkins on the left side, and obviously of Wyatt Teller. I'm excited to see what that kid brings.
Me too. And one question real quick from one of our premium subscribers, Garrison. He mentioned, Dawkins. Of all the guys that are projected to be starters on the offensive line, Nate, where do you think they rank? And we've talked about Dawkins. We were, happy with his first year. So we'll just run with him just because he's really the only one that you could say he's legitimately starting besides Jordan Mills. Where do you think he ranks when you compare him to the league? That's a tough question because me, I'm a big film guy, so I don't get to watch all these offensive linemen. But would you say he's probably top half of the league as far as left tackles go right now?
I'd feel comfortable saying I'd say he's in the top 15. I think he's right there at 15, 14. I think if you asked me right now, to put up side by side Cordy Glenn or Deion Dawkins, considering their age, considering what we know, I think that I really might take Deion Dawkins. And I don't know that I would have said that if we had knew what we were getting from Deion Dawkins 2 years ago. I don't know that I would say that, but I think I feel comfortable with that. I don't know what's going to happen with Cordy Glenn moving forward. I think his injury is really going to hamstring his ability to be what he was. That's a difficult injury to come back from, especially at the position that he's being asked to do it and his size. Yeah. And I think that comes into play is recovering from an injury that being that large can't be the most easy. It can't be the easiest thing to do. So I really like Deion Dawkins, and you see him ranking about 22nd there. I see a couple of guys ahead of him that I think I'd feel pretty comfortable putting him ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Like it's an opinion. I'd say he's probably right around the top half. I'm kind of disagree with you when it comes to Glenn. I do think a healthy aside. Okay, if he's healthy, Glenn is one of the top tackles in this league. But he's not. He's not healthy all the time.
Almost ever. Yeah.
So you can't just ignore that. But I do think for where the Bills drafted Dawkins is almost an identical player to Cordy Glenn when he was coming out of Georgia. I mean, he was a guy that was like, oh, we don't know if he can play tackle. He's too short. He's this, is that. Well, he did pretty well as a left tackle when he was healthy. So I think Dawkins his career is almost mirroring Cordy Glenn. And they're drafted right around the same time too. So I do think Dawkins is probably the only guy that I would say is even rankable when it comes to the league and when you compare him to the league. So Garrison, I hope that answers your question, man. And let's see, we got a couple more just real quick, Nate. I'll shoot those to you.
Yeah.
This one's it has to do with the running back, but one of our buddies wants to know what do you think Shady's future is after this year?
It's a good question. To me, it's going to be about how he plays this year. And I think ultimately how this team finishes. If this team is a 4 or 5 win team, which is not out of the realm of possibilities, I wonder what his future might be. I wonder what his future might be at the trade deadline.
Yeah.
If this is a team, if he's healthy, he's playing well, and this team just can't get out of its own way offensively, I wouldn't throw it past Brandon Beane to try to go get a conditional 2nd or 3rd round pick for a contender who needs a running back or an injury. I wouldn't put it past him. So I think it's going to depend on a lot of his on-field play this year. Does he take a step back? I think by just the sheer number of touches he's going to get, that his body's going to take a beating this year. Can he withstand it? I don't know. I'm hoping so, but I think LaShawn McCoy this is probably his last year in Buffalo.
Yep.
I guess.
I agree. I'd say this is probably his last year. And another guy I wrote about this morning, I think Charles Clay is going to be another one of those guys too. He hasn't missed many games for us, but he's been fighting that knee injury. Or
Jerry Hughes too. Jerry Hughes could be another one just because the sheer amount of money these guys are being paid. But I think another really interesting one too, and obviously we'll get into this more when we start to break down the defensive side of the ball, but Shaq Lawson's another. They have completely remade this defensive end position on both sides. It's pretty obvious that Trent Murphy is going to be a starter, and that you look on the other side, and so is Jerry Hughes. Where does that leave your former first-round pick? I don't know. A lot of questions that we're going to do our best to try to answer as the rest of this offseason rumbles through. Make sure if you have questions that you want to get to us during the week that you tweet at us. You could tweet at Aaron. I think Aaron's just at Aaron Quinn, right, up on Twitter.
Aaron Quinn 716. Yep.
716. You can follow him on Twitter, and you can send questions to him. You can send questions to me at Nate Geary, WGR, or Erik, who's got the at @cover_1_ handle on Twitter. So you can send any questions you might have to him, me, or whoever else you want. You can, of course, check us out at cover1.net, which I would suggest you do. The mobile, if you don't download the mobile app, first of all, you're missing out. But the mobile version of the website itself is also really, really sharp. Shows up great on your phone. So if you're looking for content on the run, head to our website, head to the app, get it all there. I've got an article, as I mentioned, about Zay Jones. It'll be dropping tomorrow morning. I've got 4 reasons why I think Zay Jones will have a breakout season in 2018. And so that'll be up tomorrow. You can check it out. Erik, anything else that you can tell the people's coming out?
Yeah, I mean, you had kind of touched upon it at the beginning of the show. We obviously added Rob Quinn. Everyone knows Rob, well-respected analyst in the Bills community and the NFL community. He put out a couple of great pieces this week. Definitely check his work out at cover1.net, and obviously follow him at Rob Quinn 619 on Twitter. Tomorrow, along with the 4 reasons that Nate had mentioned, his article that drops tomorrow, I'm going to be dropping the next part in the Brian Daboll series, and that has to do with Inside Zone. And so definitely check that out. Both of those will be dropping tomorrow morning. So thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. And until next week, I'm thinking we'll probably hit that wide receiver position.
Well,
I know Aaron wanted to be here for the big uglies. I know he's upset about it, but we're going to give an opportunity next week to break down the wide receiver position, which maybe is more polarizing than any other position on this team. So for me,
it's going to be heated. It's going to be heated.
It'll be heated. There's no doubt about it. Heated. And honestly, I think we probably need to get Brad up on here because he's the diva wide receiver. By the way, best quote you're going to get from my article is, I've never played the position of wide receiver, but wide receivers are the biggest diva on every roster. And if they tell you otherwise, it's because they play wide receiver. They're huge divas. So we'll get into that next week. Make sure you follow us again on Twitter. You can check us out, of course, at Cover One. If you missed any of the podcasts, want to go back and see any of the other ones, all available up there. Easy, one click to find it. So for me, Nate Geary, Erik Turner, another edition of Cover One Buffalo, as always, on cover1.net.